Hey, Randy Joe here, and today I'm using a different mic because my normal lapel mic seems to be busted. So until further notice, we're using this. Not sure how well that's going to sound, but it is what it is. But without further ado, this is 1001 Reviews, a series where I plan on reviewing every single album from the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book. And today we are looking at Earth, Wind, and Fire's 1975 album, That's the Way of the World. Now, That's the Way of the World was released under the Columbia label, produced by Charles Stepney and Maurice White, with art direction from Howard Fritzen, nationality USA, and a running time of 38 minutes and 53 seconds. Now, personally, I am pretty unfamiliar with most of Earth, Wind, and Fire's sort of output. However, I am familiar with the hits off of this album, and they are hits for good reason. For example, the opening here, Shining Star, perhaps is the biggest off of this album, and is just a fantastic way to open things up with a more upbeat and funky groove-like approach. It's a short track, actually, one of the shortest on the album, and over its about 2.5-minute runtime, it splices in funk, groove, soul, and R&B in a very upbeat and enjoyable fashion. And these subgenres seem like they are spliced and separated quite a bit throughout the rest of the track list, sort of being hyper-focused on many of the other songs. For example, on the title track of the album, That's the Way of the World, there is this much more soul-based approach, dropping the more funky and groovy and upbeat approach that is on Shining Star, and instead going for a much more softer and melodic sort of tone. And it's probably my favorite off this album, as its softer approach and its much more infectious sound makes this, in my opinion, a much more enjoyable listen, being very warm in its overall delivery. On top of that, its uplifting sort of themes and tones and lyrics originate back to gospel music and black folk traditions, and is done so in a very expertly done and smooth sort of fashion, taking a much more modern approach to these folk traditions. But then on the third track, it steps away from the soul entirely and feels like it is a pure funk track instead. Vocally and lyrically, this track is much simpler, much more direct in its delivery, and doesn't have a whole lot more going for it in its vocal abilities. However, it is greatly contrasted by the all over the place shifting and upbeat funky instrumental, constantly shifting the tone throughout this whole track and making things feel continually growing. And there are many similar tracks on this album where instead of having a focus on vocal delivery or lyricism at all, there is a much heavier focus on just the pure instrumental funk-based fusion that is most of this album. The seventh track, Africano, is a great example of this, as it is pure instrumental without any vocals whatsoever, and over its runtime is incredibly groovy, incredibly funky, and just a great track through and through. And despite just being an instrumental, feels like a necessity in the track list. All About Love is a soul song that feels much more spoken word based, as the vocals here are not singing as much as they are just quite simply speaking and reciting lyrics over the very soft and gentle instrumental. It is by far the softest track on the album, and is a great track that breaks up the continuously upbeat sort of tone to give off this little lull in the album before jumping right back into the upbeat funk fusions. And most of this album manages to dabble in all these different sounds such as R&B, soul, funk, and groove, really just jumping and shifting between these different genres, doing it quite smoothly, I might add. Never feeling as if it is spending too much time in one zone, but rather giving you a taste of all their different palettes. Unfortunately, I do think that the 8th track is the weakest one here, because by the time you get to this final track, most of the album has felt refreshing and unique and explosive with all its different sort of sounds, but on this one, it feels much flatter, as if they are just kind of giving a rather generic take on what they've already been doing so far. It closes out the album with a much more bland approach to all these genres and doesn't fuse them in a way that is all that engaging. It feels like it lacks the power and drive of a lot of the instrumentals of this album, while at the same time lyrically falls pretty flat to fail to make up for the lack of drive, like I mentioned. And without either of these, it just feels like a quite standout track as far as bad tracks go. It is pretty mediocre in my opinion. But overall, when it comes down to this entire album as an entire project, I do feel like most of this is somewhat enjoyable. I don't think it is so amazing that I felt myself needing to go back to it continuously. Even after repeated listenings of this thing, it didn't grow onto me to the point that I was blown away or shocked by what I was hearing, but overall I did find the experience to be genuinely pretty enjoyable, even if it's not the most explorative of these genres. And so really overall at the end of the day, when it comes to really grading this thing and thinking about it, the soft rating of this album came to a 7.4, where the hard rating came to just a 7 out of 10. And with that in mind, this thing feeling like it doesn't really quite reach the levels of a lot of the contemporaries at the time, and feeling as if it is overall kind of forgettable in some ways, I would say this is a non-essential record. All right, let's see what the next album we're listening to is in the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book. All right, random number generator, 1 to 1001, generate. 269. 269 being Al Green's Let's Stay Together. I will review Al Green's Let's Stay Together in exactly 1 week or so from now. And anyways, that pretty much does it for this video. If you like this video, please hit like and subscribe to follow along in every single album from the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book. As always, my name is Randy Joe, and I'm signing off.